kinds of analyses that we do in ecohydrology all take place at different scales. Scale is a representation of real life on a piece of paper or in a photograph. There are several scales that are commonly used for mapping landscapes. They include 1 to 24,000, 1 to 100,000, and 1 to 250,000. This is what the terminology 1 to 24,000 means. It means that for any unit on the map, any unit of distance on the map, for example an inch represents 24,000 inches in real life. The 1 to 24,000 scale map is very common. This is also called a 7.5 minute map. The 7.5 minutes refer to portions of degrees. Think of the 24,000 as the denominator in a fraction. A map is considered to be small scale when the number in the denominator is larger. So for example, the 1 to 250,000 scale map is at a smaller scale than the 1 to 240,000 scale. This is an example of a 1 to 240,000 scale map that shows the University and Valley Road. This is a smaller scale map, 1 to 100,000, that shows the University, but the primary features that you can see here are the grids of the roads and the primary routes that pass through Reno. Finally, we come to a 1 to 250,000 scale map. At this scale, there's very little detail to be seen. We still see elevation contours, but we no longer see buildings. We still see major roadways, but we don't see small roadways and the grid of urban areas. Think about the level of detail that you expect from each scale and what's possible to do with each scale of information. A 1 to 24,000 scale map offers a tremendous amount of detail that can be used for example, a watershed analysis. A 1 to 100,000 scale map offers the kind of detail that might be useful for a watershed or a sub-regional analysis. For example, if we're looking at the overall city of Reno. Finally, a 1 to 250,000 scale map might be useful for an overall analysis of the region. Usually using something like a Geographic Information System or GIS, this type of information is combined to display information about things like soils, topography, vegetation, and other types of land use. Here's a graphic example of what scale looks like using Google Earth. It's a little difficult to get the scales exactly to correspond with those that I demonstrated from commonly available maps. However, if you look at this image that shows 1000 Valley Road at a scale of 1 inch equals 2,218 feet, one of the things that you can see is a tremendous level of detail. You can even see cars passing by on Route 80, just to the south of 1000 Valley Road. Let's step to the next smallest scale. This is as close as I could get to it. 1 inch equals 8,113 feet. It's very close to the 1 to 100,000 scale that I mentioned earlier. At this scale, it's very difficult to see any fine detail, for example, cars, but one can see again the general grid of the city, including streets and some patterns related to vegetation. Finally, when we reach the 1 to 250,000 scale, and this is an approximation of that, in this illustration 1 inch equals 17,160 feet, when we reach this scale, we can see more or less the region as a whole. We see some illustrations of mountains to the left, or some representations, some images of mountains to the left, We can barely see the Truckee River corridor as it snakes through from east to west, and we can see a little bit of the detail of roadways that pass through the region. Try this using Google Earth. Make sure that under the View menu on Google Earth, the scale legend is checked and turned on. Then use the wheel on your mouse to shift back and forth between scales. You'll find that Google Earth will actually provide more information than is available on most commonly available maps. So for example, for Valley Road, the scale can be increased almost to the point where 1 inch equals 468 feet without losing resolution. At this point, you'll be able to see the arrows on the roadway. You'll be able to see individual cars. If the scale becomes much larger than this, however, one of the things you find is that the image begins to become pixelated, which means that it's the small elements of the picture, the little squares that make up the picture, become more visible than the elements of the image itself, including things like cars.